All right. Hi. It's me again. All right. Now, believe it or not, it's actually hard to stand here and read like this, but I'm going to do it. I'll do what I can. Okay, here we go. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate said, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." And when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside to the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power to either free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. And finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. All right, so yes, this is our third time doing sort of this passage. Every week we add a few verses to sort of give you more context and to help you get the feel of what's going on. Each time that one of the Gospels tells this story, they emphasize things that were important to them. Every Gospel, there's 4 of them, by the way, if you're kind of new to the Scriptures. The very beginning of what's called the New Testament it's called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's the same story of Jesus, his birth all the way to his crucifixion. Skips most of his life except the last 3 years, when the disciples joined him. But every time the story is told, it's written from a different place, in a different time, to a different audience, and a different reason for telling it. And so each one is slightly different and emphasizes different things. Now, we've talked about this before. I'll do a bit of a refresher. There's something called Christology. And, I'll just put the word up here. Christology has to do with sort of where you place Jesus authoritatively on sort of the spectrum of the people that you listen to. Is Jesus just another voice amongst the others? Is he above the others? Or is he just somebody you admire that helps you sort of accomplish the things that you would like to accomplish? So John's gospel is known in the scriptures for having the highest Christology. If you read John's gospel, it's much more sort of fantastic, the storytelling. The miracles are bigger, the crowds are bigger, the confrontations are stronger. Jesus is much more sort of confrontational with a lot of people. So let's look at this. So there's two ways that sort of your Christology can go. You can have a high Christology, which means that Jesus, your view is that basically Jesus is fully revealing who God is. When you think of God, you should think of Jesus. This is what it means to have a high Christology, that God is exactly like Jesus in every way, and there is no difference in actions between the two, that Jesus fully reveals who the Father is. It's the highest authority for Christian faith and life, Lord over every other power, political, religious, cultural, and also Jesus is the one to whom all Christian loyalties must ultimately submit. I want to be clear on this. This is talking about the beliefs of Christians, and it is the view of a Christian, someone who chooses to follow Jesus, that has a high Christology, that would say that Jesus is the highest rule and everyone should submit to him. By saying everyone, they're saying all Christians. If you go out and you try to conquer people and force them to submit to Jesus, you actually have what's called a low Christology, because you're doing things that are antithetical to what Jesus would do in order to make them submit to Jesus, if that makes any sense. And we'll go farther today in that. But a low Christology is basically Jesus is important, but he's not authoritative. Jesus would be one God among many, tradition, the Bible, doctrine, etc. And oftentimes you would say, well, Jesus says this, yes, but Christian doctrine says this And sometimes you might actually find, as I did over the years, and it's part of what made me sort of deconstruct my evangelicalism, was that I realized a lot of the doctrines that I held were antithetical to the Jesus that I proclaimed, and it created a lot of faith crisis, as it does. And so, low Christology also looks like saying that Jesus is someone who helps support existing social, political, or religious systems. You can see low Christology all around us. There are a lot of influencers today who will they'll go out to big crowds and they'll debate the things of the Bible, and at the end of that, they'll pass out political red hats or blue hats. That is a low Christology. That is someone who is making Jesus serve the empire or the president or their political party. When you do this, you are displaying that you do not think Jesus is higher than these things, that actually Jesus is serving these things. And anyone who makes Jesus serve empire has a very low Christology, and the community of John would say they should be outright ignored. It would be a figure Jesus would be a figure who reinforces cultural values. When you say, this is the way that we do things around here, and then you quote a bunch of lines from Jesus at different places or from scriptures to say that Christianity should look like this particular culture, and this culture looks the most like Jesus. That's a very, very, very low Christology. And people don't tend to realize this. They think that they're honoring Jesus in some way by making Jesus serve their culture. And so sort of, if you look at the spectrum of high Christology and low Christology, and you look out there, you can see it across the spectrum. The Gospel of John has a very high Christology. The community out of which the Gospel of John came had a view that Jesus was the voice that they should listen to above all others. In their world, whether it was the religious leaders, whether it was the political leaders. And in this passage today, you can see like the greatest display of high Christology, really, I would argue, in all of the scriptures. And by the way, this is the same community that produced the books of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, the books of love, where they name antichrists. And then you have the book of Revelation, which also came from the same community, where they picture Jesus as a lamb, and they tell the story of this lamb doing battle with the beasts and the dragons and winning. And so the community out of which this book came had a view of Jesus which basically said, no matter what anyone says anywhere, and no matter what it costs us, and no matter how painful it will be or what the consequences will be, we will follow Jesus because there is no one else to follow. And so when you study the book of John, this is what you're going to get. Let's look at verse 7. Let's jump right into it here, verse 7. Verse 7 and 8 basically says, the Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law, and according to that law, he must die. Talking about Jesus. The Jewish leaders are talking to Pilate. Pilate and the Jewish leaders are in a sparring match over Jesus. They're really arguing over authority and power over the people and deciding what they should do. And Jesus is sort of caught in the middle because Jesus has caused a bit of a ruckus through going around loving the wrong people, welcoming the wrong people, healing the wrong people, all the people that the religious leaders and the empire don't want you to look at. And Jesus makes them front and center and says, I'm with them, by the way. And so you have this sparring thing sort of happen. So the Jewish leaders go to Pilate and they insist, we have a law, and according to that law, Jesus must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. Now, I want to pause here because I want to talk about that phrase, Son of God. My upbringing sort of taught me, I don't know that anyone explicitly said it, but my understanding of the Son of God was that Jesus was born of God. He's the Father, and so Jesus is the Son, and that's what makes him the Son, and that being born of God is what gave him divinity and what gave him all these sort of magical powers as I saw them. And he was powerful and had amazing, incredible abilities because he was the Son of God, and he inherited these powers from his dad. That was way wrong. I was way off. And there is a theological idea to it, but in the Gospel of John, the Son of God has a lot of political context. So let's do a little bit of history. So in 44 BC, Julius Caesar is assassinated. He goes to work at the Senate, and he has just declared himself. Rome was always a democracy. And Julius Caesar gets up and he declares himself the eternal leader of Rome, that he will rule for the rest of his life, and there will be no more voting and no more democracy, and he will rule. And everyone's like, okay, and they kind of gather around him, and one guy grabs his cloak, which was the sign for the others to all pull out their swords and attack and kill him. And that's where we get the Et tu Brute, you tu Brute, all that stuff. So it's called the Ides of March. And so he dies, and then his son takes the throne, his adopted son, Octavian. That same year, Octavian is hosting, he wants it to look like I had nothing to do with this, right? So he hosts these sort of Olympic Games in Rome, and they're all in honor of his father, adopted father, who is dead. And while the games are going on, a comet appears in the sky. And the people, they look at this, and, in the ancient world, at night we didn't have all the street lights, and people would lie on the rooftops, and they would look up at the stars, and you could see everything. I don't know if you've ever actually seen the Milky Way. You've been to a place where there is no light, and you see the sky. It's incredible. And all of these stars are telling stories to them, and they're trying to interpret them. And this comet appears, and it's new. And so they're all talking about how this is a divine thing because all the gods lived in the heavens according to them, and they're all up there, and we can see what the gods are doing through interpreting the stars and the movements of the sky. And so Octavian sees a political opportunity, and he says, you know what this is? This is my father ascending to the right hand of the gods, and I am the son of God. And he minted coins that said Divi Filius, which means the divine offspring, son of God. And so this is what Octavian used to introduce the sort of cult of emperor worship in Rome. And the emperors began to be worshipped as gods and as the sons of gods. And so you go back to the passage here, and it says, here, let me back it up. Let me back it up and look at it one more time. We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. Suddenly there's a pause. And Pilate goes, interesting. And he takes Jesus back inside. I'll go forward 2 slides again. And it says, when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. Because, hold on. Is Jesus claiming to have some sort of claim to the throne? All right, you have some sort of Game of Thrones kind of thing going on here. And he's a little scared. He's like, I don't know who this guy is. I don't know where he's from. And he's becoming a little bit scared. It says, and he went back inside to the palace, and he questioned Jesus. It says, where did you come from? Where do you come from? He asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. Now, Pilate is not asking Jesus a geographical question. He's not asking him what town he comes from. He doesn't care what town he comes from. He wants to know where he comes from. Is he a person, or is he sort of a descendant of a divine king? They've all bought into this emperor worship, including Pilate. And Pilate is terrified to possibly put to death one of the sons of God. This is a political claim over the throne and who has the right to rule over the people. And the Gospel of John puts this front and center. And they want you to see it. Not only do they want you to see it, they want to create contrast between Jesus, the religious leaders, and the imperial leaders. And it gets really interesting. So, hold on. Let's just, okay, so Pilate's not asking where Jesus grew up. He's asking sort of where do you come from? And the community that the Apostle John established here, they don't believe that following Jesus makes you sort of a better citizen of the empire. They don't have a low Christology. They don't say, a good Christian will do this, and we'll do this, and we'll do this, and we'll live this certain way and keep the peace in the empire. This is not their idea at all, because John's community believes that the empire is a beast that devours its enemies, and then it devours its people, and then it devours itself. And John's community believes that every empire in the world, every militarized nation, is part of the beast, that there are only 2 nations in the world. There is Israel and there is Babylon. It's not talking about the nation state of Israel that was established in the 1940s. It's talking about Israel, the people, the poor, beaten down, oppressed people that God chose and said, anyone who stands against you, oppressed people, I'll be against them. And so every nation that sort of militarizes and stuff becomes Babylon. And so Jesus doesn't answer him. Because if Jesus answers him, now we're talking about authority and the right to sort of rule over the people. And if Jesus answers Pilate, he is affirming that Pilate has the authority to question him. And Jesus isn't interested in sort of honor and status, but he also is not interested in letting this guy think that he has power over him. And so Jesus just remains silent. And Pilate's a little upset about that. He's consistently annoyed of Jesus just not talking to him at all. And now he's beginning to realize why. Before, it's like he thought maybe he had nothing to say or he's low status, whatever. Now he's beginning to feel threatened by Jesus, Son of God, and he's not answering me. What is this? And so Pilate threatens him. Where are we at here? Pilate threatens him. He says, do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize that I have the power to either free you or crucify you? So I have the power to free you and give you my blessing as a free man and raise your status amongst the people. Or, again, I can crucify you and erase you from all of history. And Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. So he says, whatever power you have, you're not a son of God. Any power you have comes from above you. And just sort of Jesus' way of saying, like, I'm being called a son of God, you're not, right? Like, it's very sort of confrontational. I have the power over you, he says, that Pilate says, and Jesus says, you only have the power that my Father has given you. And so Jesus takes this sort of a very Roman argument that the king rules only because the divine one has decided to allow the king to continue ruling. And the moment the divine one is done with you ruling, you're done. It has nothing to do with you. You have no choice in the matter. It's all been laid out, and your authority is temporary. And it's sort of like, it's disruptive, what he's saying. The power does not belong to the ruler. The power, and therefore the allegiance, in the minds of the of John's community, belongs to Jesus. All of our allegiance belongs to Jesus. We look right past Caesar and we look at Jesus and we follow him. And so over the course of John's gospel, the reader begins to realize that Jesus' power under others and with others is a legitimate threat to the powers of the empire, which is power over, power of the sword, power of the military, power of might, power to make you afraid so that you obey. And they realize how weak that is in comparison to Jesus' power to love you in a way that changes you and brings you to submission on your own. Because this is what love does. Fear makes you submit simply out of fear. It doesn't change your heart. Jesus can change people's heart. And sort of like they're emphasizing constantly the power that God has. And so over the course of John's gospel, the reader starts to realize this. And John's gospel reveals an interesting bit of information, which I want to emphasize, is that simply the kings who sit on the throne in the story, Pilate, Caesar, Herod, all of the kings who sit on the throne, and the religious leaders, the spiritual leaders of all the people, they recognize the same authority. They recognize Caesar as the authority. And they affirm this in verse 12. Look at this. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar's. The religious leaders, the spiritual leaders of the people who are supposed to serve God and submit only to God, are claiming that Caesar has the power. Something's wrong. You're supposed to see this in the Gospel of John and be like, these guys are wrong. They've been led astray. They've gone so deep down the ideological rabbit hole and the power grab power hole that they somehow ended up here where they think Caesar is their king. It goes even farther. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. So Jesus, claiming to be the king, is opposing Caesar. And the community of John would say, yes, they do. Exactly. They want you to see that. And then you go down a little farther in verse 15, it says, shall I crucify your king? And once again, he calls him your king. And here's the response. So, like Herod's henchmen, telling the religious leaders, I'm going to crucify your king, your guy here. And they say, we have no king but Caesar, the chief priests over God's people, declaring, we have no king but Caesar. This is a heresy, obviously. This is incredibly low Christology. It is a Christology that allows God's people to just simply follow the leaders of this world and ignore all of the teachings of Jesus. And so the question here that we're supposed to ask is, who does the Christian serve? The one who chooses to follow Jesus. Who are we supposed to serve? If you've ever been in a discussion about morality and politics, you've probably been Romans 13, I would imagine. Every week I get Romans 13. If you're not familiar with Romans 13, it's the verse that people use to shut you up when you say something about political leaders that they don't like and they're a Christian and they know that you love the scriptures and that you are a follower of Jesus and that you love the church. And so they will pick and choose verses of the Bible to get you to take your allegiance off of Jesus and put it on the king or the president or the governor or whoever. Romans 13 basically says this. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Very convincing. Very convincing. And for the average person who just gets the Bible and opens it up and reads it, and they see this, and they're like, okay, I guess whatever Hitler says we had to do back in the 30s, we're going to do now. Like we had to do, like whatever. And by the way, this is the passage that was used in the time of Hitler and the time of Mussolini to keep Christians in line and serving them. It's the same passage that was used during Jim Crow segregation. It's the arguments that were used to oppose civil rights. It was the arguments that enslavers used to keep the people that they were enslaving subject to them. They would quote this verse and say, you have to do what we say, we're in charge over you. And it's what the Bible says. It's the same law that upheld slavery. Abolitionists were believed to be rebelling against God's government because they were trying to overturn pro-slavery laws. And this is the verse that they used. I was very shocked this week to hear, actually, because I was already writing this sermon, and then one of our politicians stood up and used it to try to get everyone to submit to the government, and I was very surprised to see Stephen Colbert take it on and get up and just be like, you are wrong. And he just gave like this theological takedown of the whole thing. It was really impressive. I didn't know Stephen Colbert was that deep into theology. Apparently he is. But he did a really, really good job, because here's what's going on here. Any serious Bible scholar knows that Paul is not making a universal statement here for every church. Paul is not Jesus. Paul is your brother. Paul is a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, an apostle of Jesus. He is not Jesus. Jesus is the one who makes the authoritative claims in all churches for all times. If you read Paul, and what Paul says seems to disagree with what Jesus says, you are the one who is wrong. It's that easy. You are misinterpreting what Paul is saying. Paul is writing this particular letter from the city of Corinth to the church in Rome under Emperor Nero. Nero had not yet started his persecution. He had not yet began to wipe out the Christians and torture them. I talked to one of my professors, Scott McKnight, about this, who's written many books on the book of Romans. By the way, we spent 3 years, I believe, in the book of Romans. If you want to go back and listen to it, we did it backwards. We started at the end, so you would get the context of it all the way to the beginning. And it got us kicked out of our denomination. It's not like we didn't see it coming. Where was I? Okay, so Paul is writing to a single church. You're not a Roman, but you can glean from what Paul is doing and what he's saying. He's trying to find a way. There was a lot of people in that church who were Jewish Christians, and the Jewish Christians in Rome were really, really upset about the taxes that were being levied upon them, and it was just completely oppressive. And they were really good at rioting, and they wanted to get up and riot, and they wanted to kill some Romans. And Paul says, no. Why don't we find a way, do our best to live peacefully? This is specifically a passage about taxes, about paying taxes to Rome, a specific tax from a specific coin that was only available in the temple, and they thought it was idolatry to pay these taxes. And Paul's like, don't. Just don't. He says, but the thing is, Paul does actually the same thing that the community of John does. He says, this is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants. We read that, and we hear people in authority say, hey, I'm God's servant, you have to listen to me. That's not what Paul is doing. Paul is saying, hey, authorities, you are God's servants. We serve God, not you. We'll do our best to keep the peace. And Paul says this, and people say this all throughout the scriptures, different prophets do. Do everything you can to live at peace with your neighbors. As long as it depends upon you, do what you can. Even if it costs you, even if it hurts, try to live peaceably amongst people. And he says, give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. When you take a verse like this and you rip it out of its context and you say, no, this verse applies to everyone, everywhere, just know you're standing shoulder to shoulder with the worst people who have ever handled the Bible and done the worst things in human history. Just know that. If you read something from Paul or any other writer of the Scriptures and it seems to contradict the Sermon on the Mount, or anything that Jesus has taught, stop and think, what am I missing? Read some books, make some phone calls, send some emails, do the work. Do not submit to powerful people using the Bible to hurt and oppress others. Do not do it. Oh man. Okay. I get so far off the notes, I'm like, how do I get back to, you can't get there from here. I have to go back to here to get to there. Okay, so I want to talk about, there's one more piece of irony that I want to point out, and this will take up the rest of our time. There's an ironic thing that John does. It's constantly, it's this contrast between light and dark, and we've talked about this. There are characters who are in the light. There are characters who are in the dark. Jesus twice calls himself the light of the world. The book starts off with Jesus, the light entering into the world, and the darkness can't prevail over it, and the light spreads and the darkness is pushed back. There's all this language about light and dark that is terribly pixeled. And so there are characters who are in the light, and there are characters who are in the dark. The ones in the dark are constantly confused by what Jesus is doing. They don't understand. They ask questions about, what is this? Where does this come from? What is this doing? And then you have these people over in the light who see Jesus and instantly recognize, oh, this guy's from God. And they see good things that he's doing, and even though they know it violates their cultural mores, and even though they know it doesn't seem like this is the right thing to do, like according to everyone else around me, everyone's telling me this is wrong, but when I look at it, I recognize that this is what Jesus would do. And these characters are all through, and there's this huge irony that sort of happens here, the irony of John's gospel, where these people are constantly asking the question, where does this come from? Where does this come from? Where does this come from? Let me just give you a couple of examples. All through the book, people are asking, the leaders question John's identity and authority. They don't recognize that it came from God. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? The wedding guests don't understand where did this wine come from? The Samaritan, I don't need to go down the whole list. Jesus asked Philip at one point, where do we think the bread's going to come from? Where do you think the bread's going to come from? It's going to come from God. And people recognize this is of God, this is of God. And then there's other people who don't yet recognize what is of God and what is not of God. And they confuse the empire with God, which is exactly what's happening again in this passage with both parties, the religious leaders and Pilate and the imperial leaders, all of this. None of them are able to recognize that Jesus is from God because they are dwelling in darkness. I overheard somebody talking this week about how did they put it? People who are faking something, people who are faking sort of a spirituality, people who are faking an identity of some sort, get really, really mad at those people who naturally embody it without even trying. And they want to break them, and they want to destroy them, and they want to hide them and cover them up because their true reality and their authentic goodness and light that is coming out of their heart, they worked very hard for. And that authentic light, when people see it, then they see you faking it. They can recognize it. People recognize when something is good. No matter how many powerful people stand up and say, no, this was not a good person. This was a bad person, and this and this and this. We all can see that it's good. We can all see what you're doing, and we can see that it's bad. And this is the contrast that John's gospel offers us constantly, over and over and over. The ability and sort of the encouragement that you have the authority to recognize the things that come from God, no matter who's telling you that they don't. If they look like Jesus and you know that, even if you can't fully understand how, you recognize, no, this is good. This is good and that's bad. And it's readily easy to recognize these things. And this is what Pilate is doing. Where do you come from? Neither Pilate nor the religious leaders can see that Jesus has come from God, yet the poorest, most uneducated people can. The Samaritan woman who has been kicked out, who has lived an incredibly painful life, she can see where he comes from Come and meet the man who told me everything I ever... Like, she recognizes Jesus. These people who have suffered, who are at the bottom of the boot of the empire, see Jesus, and they recognize right away that Jesus comes from God. And then there's all these people, and they're usually religious leaders. You have Nicodemus, and it says he came to Jesus under the cover of darkness. That's not just describing the time of day. It's telling you that he doesn't recognize either. These guys are all these spiritual leaders are in darkness, and they keep following the king, and they keep following the emperor, and they don't realize the divine Son of God is actually right there in their midst, and they're about to put him to death. And it will end up being the death of them. Over and over and over. They don't recognize it. When I was a young pastor in my 20s, I was very evangelical. I grew up fundamentalist. I grew up Southern Baptist. My dad was a director of a worldwide missions organization, and I went to Bible college, and then I went to Liberty University, and I was in it, and I became a pastor. But in the time when I was in college and in high school, I met a lot of I was a skateboarder. I would meet a lot of people around town when I was skateboarding at my favorite little spots who would sleep under the place of those spots, and I got to know a lot of people, and it sort of changed my view of people, because I grew up sort of with this, no one taught me it, it's just something you pick up along the way, that like poor people are poor because they made bad decisions, because they did the wrong thing, and that's why they are, and those who are doing well made the right decisions, and God is blessing them. And then by the time I went off to college, I no longer believed that. By the time I got out of college, I was studying to be a pastor. I was like, I'm never going to be a pastor. And then I was working at Watermark Community Church. The pastor left, and there was 30 of us left. All the people, I was 26, all the people that were older than me left. And so I get it. I wouldn't have stuck around either for a 26-year-old kid becoming a pastor. And we're having church, and this one Sunday, this girl walks in, and we had never sat down and deconstructed anything, but we were beginning to recognize goodness and love, and we were beginning to recognize that things were not always how we had been taught they were. And this girl walks in. I won't say her name because she may still be listening all these years later, but she came into the church, and I said, "Hi, what's your name?" She told me her name, and I said, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Oh, my church sent me here." I said, "Your church sent you here? Are you like a spy to come check out what we're doing?" She goes, "No, I realized I was gay, and they told me I didn't have a place there, and they sent me here." And I was like, "Why'd they send you here?" We had never had a conversation. We had never talked about this. It wasn't a topic of conversation, but we knew they were LGBTQ people, which wasn't even a phrase that we knew at the time, in the church. And they were serving, and we just loved them. We were their friends. And she came in, and she was like, "And they sent me here." And I was like, "Well, I'm glad they sent you. Welcome." And she helped us set the coffee up, and she stuck around for weeks and weeks and months, and it grew. And at some point, like right away, we all recognized, I had been raised to basically be taught gay people are from Satan. They're from the devil. I saw her, and I knew she wasn't. I recognized goodness when I saw it. We all recognized goodness when we saw it. Nobody said a word. It was like, okay, come in. That was probably one of the main reasons that we began to sort of ask deeper questions and show greater love, past boundaries that we were told we weren't allowed to cross. I have a cousin I grew up with. His name was Caleb, and we grew up both together. His dad also worked at the fundamentalist thing that my dad worked at, and so we spent a lot of summers together. And he, at one point, my cousin died, his sister, in a horrible accident, a car accident after she'd been married for 2 months. And we just watched the pain, the family disintegrated. He lost his faith, as a lot of people in that room did, and went off on this journey. A lot of stuff came out about abuse and horrible things that happened. A few years later, we got reconnected. He had changed his name to Kayla and became her, changed her identity, became trans, and you know, I know her. She was an incredibly beautiful, wonderful person who loved Jesus with all her heart. And we lost touch. And then one day I'm scrolling through, this was 3 months ago, I'm scrolling through one of the stupid meta sites, and I saw her face go by, and I stopped and I scrolled back up. There was her face, and it was all beaten up. And she was in a hospital bed because she had gone to D.C. and was riding a skateboard around D.C., and a group of Christian nationalists saw her and beat her and left her for dead in the grass and took all her stuff. And I reached out when I saw that, and she was doing a fundraiser to try to get, she didn't have health insurance, she's trying to get help. And I reached out and I was like, what happened? Are you okay? Just questions. She wrote back to me and said, look, I'm not mad. Literal words, we can't beat this with hate, only with love. The first thing she said to me. That was the most Christian thing I've heard from any Christian in a very, very, very long time. Part of living in the light is the ability to recognize goodness and Christ-likeness when you see it and knowing where it came from. And being able to recognize what we used to call posers. I don't know. Recognize what people living in the dark and trying to, I was a skateboarder, and trying to like put off this vibe of who they are and recognizing this is not the light and this is the light. And part of following Jesus is doing that work inside that attunes you to the light and learning the same things Charity was talking about this morning. Learning to attune your heart to it so that when you see love, you can embrace it and welcome it in. And that you can return love. Christian nationalism is not from God. If you understand Jesus and are living in the light, you don't need anyone to twist the scriptures to argue that for you. You can look at the pictures and videos of what's happening all around us today and readily recognize who and what is coming from where. There's this, this is the last one. This is somebody I was reading about this week. His name was Franz Jägerstätter. He was a conscientious objector during World War II, an Anabaptist, which is what I consider myself as well. And he was an Austrian, a small-town farmer who was the guy on the motorcycle right there. Small-town farmer who was called up to serve in Hitler's army once they annexed Austria. And he went to his priest and tried to figure out what to do, and the priest said, you should go along with it. And he went to his neighbors, and they all told him resistance is pointless. And even his bishop advised him that obedience to the authorities was safer for his family. And everyone around him, the church and the state alike, everyone told him the same thing. Just comply. This is your duty to comply. And Franz kept coming back to one question. Can I follow Jesus and fight for this regime? But he came to the conclusion that he could not. And so, the more he looked at Jesus, the more he realized that none of what he was seeing in their world, no matter how much Christian lingo that they used, none of it had anything to do with the kingdom of God. And so he refused to swear a loyalty oath to Hitler, to serve in the army, and it didn't end well. He was killed. He was executed. But the point of Christianity, the point of the Christian life is not for it to end well. It's for it to look like Christ so that the world can bear witness to something higher and better than what is being offered out there. We are to live lives that are so joyful and loving and merciful that it disrupts the empire in a way that makes them deal with it in some way. And every time they nail someone to a cross, it's held up again, and we see, oh, you're wrong and he's right. Every single time. Now the man is hailed as a hero. There's a movie about him. There's books written about him. He didn't have some special authority. He wasn't a theologian. He didn't have church approval. He didn't even have public support. Everyone was told him what he was doing is a bad idea and it's wrong and he shouldn't do it. But he recognized light when he saw it. He recognized darkness when he saw it. He would have fit in well with the Johannian community here. He simply trusted that if something contradicts the way of Jesus, the Christian already knows what to do. And John's gospel says that those who live in light recognize what comes from God, and sometimes faithfulness is simply refusing to call darkness light, no matter who tells you that it is. Yeah? Let's pray. Father, be with us today. Give us strength. Give us wisdom. Give us light in our hearts that burns brightly to help us see love when it is standing right in front of us. You have told us that we will recognize you in the face of the poor and the homeless and the prisoner and the immigrant and the oppressed and the abused and the outcast. Help us to continue to see it. Keep that light burning in our chests. May it illuminate our eyes so that when we look at the world, we can recognize you there. and serve you and love you by loving them. Thank you, Father. Pray all this in your name. Amen. Would you stand with me and send ourselves out with the Lord's Prayer one last time? Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Have a great day. Good luck on your football game. May everybody have fun.